which way do we have to take, especially when you have two different parties? Or is there a way of bringing those two elements together, of having that mainstream court system and a healing system?
Hello, OneSunnyDay.com podcast. Today, my guest is Stephen Paquette, and he is an Indigenous knowledge guide, and we will be talking about all things truth and reconciliation, Indigenous issues in the interview today. Hello, Steve, and Steve would like to give his traditional greeting.
Ani, bonjour, Greg. Thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to be with your viewers today on One Sunny Day, and it most certainly is. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. And as I say, what I would like to do is I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce myself in a more traditional First Nations way. And it's going to sound a little different because in our modern Western world, we're used to us introducing ourselves usually with our name, our job title, and where we work, and that's it. Whereas in an Indigenous worldview, any relationship that we have, we want it to be as deep and as good a relationship that we can. So our introductions sound a little like this. Ani, bonjour. Stephen John Paquette Gijnikaj. I simply said, hello, my name is Stephen John Paquette. I was born John Andrew Kimawan. I share that with you because I'm a product of something called the 60s Scoop, part of Canada's history. Makwa Dodem, Makwa meaning bear, Dodem meaning clan. I'm of the Bear clan. I'm not Canadian. My nationality is Anishinaabe. I'm Ojibwe of the Anishinaabe Nation from Wikwimikong, unceded territory up on Manitoulin Island. In my community, I've been a former Eagle staff carrier. I am a community pipe carrier. In my journey, I have been a police officer, a social worker, a teacher. I am a son. I am a father, a grandfather, a brother, an uncle, a storyteller, and I like to think a friend to many people, period. So that would be an example of a traditional First Nations greetings for the purpose of trying to establish a better relationship.
Great, Steve, and I like the way that you sort of contrast and compared the two modes of greeting there, and I think it's mostly because the we'll call the non-Indigenous greeting, if it's designed to immediately establish kind of a business transactional relationship, and it's designed to only bring forward the things that will be relevant to this current transaction that we're about to conduct, right? So that is kind of an immediate nod to the non-permanency of the greeting, right? It's because the traditional greeting implies that there is a going forward from this point, right? But if it's a transaction with someone in a convenience store, they're like, okay, you know what I mean? That's like obviously a clipped transaction, which is not, that's not a normal thing to happen to people at all, right?
Yeah, and when you say normal, like when I go into the classes and I do presentations, one of the first things I always ask people simply is it okay to think differently? Is it okay to be different? And a lot of people struggle with thinking different. And, what has become the norm, I guess you could say, people tend to think that is the only way of doing things. So we have to get our head out of that headspace thinking that there's only one way to do things.
Well, I think so I agree completely with what you're saying, right? But even like when you say sort of think differently, right? It's still within like, for example, if you said, where are you allowed to think differently, right? You're allowed to think differently in a context and bring up things in a context, so long as you never get around to something that's actually going to challenge, an underpinning, you know what I mean, of the construction that we're all sort of engaged in at the moment, right?
Yep.
You can't go into if you just went into a classroom and went like all formal education, we can't have this. The kids, it sort of blew up the whole thing top to bottom. They would go, we don't know how to continue with this, right? It's like so radical from the community baseline. It's hard to get to.
Yeah, but I would also go with that is that it doesn't have to be one or the other. You know, those two ways of thinking actually can take place in that same space, as long as you have that enlightenment or that awareness that, yes, I can think multiple different ways, and not to say that my way is the only way.
Right. Well, but actually my better point is that it's part of the dialectic space of Western society to say, here's how we're going to tell. Here's going to be the box of quote unquote thinking differently. Right. You can think and say whatever you want, but it has to be crushed into a dialectic logical construction. Right. In which, at the end of the day, your feelings are meaningless. Like that's one of the sort of Western modern tropes, right? Your personal feelings on a matter are dismissed. Everyone's, not mine, yours, or are dismissed out of hand, right? It's then what can logically what can logically be drawn from what you're saying, or other what other things can we look to verify what you're saying or not verify what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
So that, I mean, it's amazing how you're 100% right. The greeting is massive. It's changing a whole dynamic, right? It brings a whole bunch of things into play, in terms of who you are and where you're from, and that's different than sort of a straight, I say more business like relationship. Well, the first thing I wanted to ask you today is, as we were talking earlier, and I pointed out that some 5% of people within the geographic boundary of Canada live in what's a modern reservation. I don't know what else to refer to the landmass that people are in as. Um, uh, and um, I'm 46 year olds, 4 children. I know nothing about it. So my first question was going to be just to provide some context for people, like what is a reservation, and how is what is different about living in that area or space, or whatever you want to refer to it as.
Yeah, absolutely. Many people in our Indigenous communities, well, some of us still refer to it as the res or the reservation. A lot of people also refer to it as our community or our home community, trying to get away from that colonized language of the reservation. But having said that, if you want to have a conversation about reservations, you have to look at it within the context of Canadian history. There's no way around it. And understanding that the reservation system came about as a result of the Indian Act. So going back to when Canada was created in 1867, one of the first things our founding fathers did was that they implemented this piece of legislation called the Indian Act. Now, the Indian Act was interesting because it was this law that gave complete control over First Nations people to this newly formed country. There was no consultation on this. There was no consent given for this. So we had this Indian Act, and so complete control. And one of them was through something that we now know as the reservation system. And the reservation system would not allow you to leave your home community without the permission of someone called an Indian agent. Right. And again, all of these things are important to know. We can talk about what a reservation looks like today and its social economic issues, but we have to look at in the whole context of history. And complete control from Greg. Imagine not being able to leave your home community even to go shopping. Seeing as the Indian pass system was in place up until the 1960s, if your grandparents were here and wherever they grew up, they wanted to visit family or friends. Well, they just got up and they just went. They didn't have to ask the permission of the government. May I go see family, or may I go see friends? So again, this was to get control over First Nations people. You couldn't go shopping, you couldn't visit friends unless you got that Indian pass. But you could get that Indian pass, and Greg, all you had to do was give up your language, give up your culture, give up your traditions and your ceremonies and everything that made up your cultural identity. And if you did that, well, then you were a good Indian and you would get that Indian pass, right? So we have to look at the reservation in that context of what it was. When we look at reservations or our home communities nowadays, there is no one set way of what a reservation is going to look like. Much like any town, you look at the town of Oakville that I just moved from last month, and you can compare it to the town of Massey up north. Well, they're both towns geographically, depending where they are. Social economic opportunities are going to make them different. So whether it's an Indigenous reservation up north or a non-Indigenous, they're all going to vary. And again, a lot of that with any kind of community depends on the social economic opportunities there. It also depends on the form of governance that particular reservation has. All reservations are managed by something called the elected chief and council. And some people in the First Nations community look at the elected chief and council really as just as financial administrators for the Canadian government. You have some communities that are leaning more towards a traditional form of governance that might include the clan grandmothers. So there's just so many different avenues to go when you look at these communities. You have some communities that still don't have drinkable water. Not too far from here, actually, up in Brantford, up at the Six Nations. You look at communities that have great opportunities for economic development versus communities up north that aren't. So it varies so much, Greg.
Right. Well, there's two things I'll pick up on there. That if there's a silver lining to COVID, I think a lot of people can imagine much more clearly what living on a reservation with the Indian pass system might be like, right? Because now you can't go to the grocery unless somebody makes up rules that say you can. Now you can't. You know what I mean? And they are kind of they're they are kind of creating this vision of what a good person is. I'm vaccinated, by the way, so I can have don't worry. But they are creating this creation. Well, a good person is vaccinated, a good person has done all these things, they're going to get, there's talk of it, they're going to get the magic pass to go out, they're going to be able to go to the grocery store, their kids are going to be able to go to school. Well, now you're a bad citizen, right? You haven't done these things. Well, maybe there was this sort of threatening thing just today where, well, maybe if your kids aren't vaccinated, they're a close contact, they'll be out of school for 20 days, right? So I think nobody can really put their live the life of another person and really put their shoes in it, but I think people can imagine that a lot closer, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. I think that people, with this whole COVID situation, are forced to see the world in a new light and of what potentially might be down the road. And it's interesting to see all the concern and consternation about it. Yet this has been the lives of Indigenous people for over 150 years in Canada. Of that social isolation, of having those controls put on them. So I find it kind of interesting when people get so bent out of shape with what could potentially happen. We've been living this for over 150 years.
Well, I don't like it. I don't like it both ways. I can be against both. I can be against the both authoritative, government constructions, both the past and the present. I think that the reason why I was asking about sort of the reservation is it strikes me that we now have people who are living in a completely different area that's governed by a completely different set of rules, right? Like whatever the colonialist towns are, and when you say colonialist, I don't think that people sort of say, well, the colonialist project never stops, right? Like if you said today they're all colonialists, I would say, well, in a way we kind of are, right? Like we're still hauling around the Roman package of ideas, like exactly like they were the people who take over an area, and as long as your kids wanted to wear togas and learn Latin, great. You know what I mean? They were not some kind of weird uh, um, um, like as long as you were playing by their rules and playing by their balls, it was a sunny day, and they were rolling their system out across the earth, right? They're progressives too, right? They believe that there's this vision of humans which is progressed from the previous vision.
Hmm.
And so when people sort of say, okay, well, there's still this colonialist thing. There's definitely this colonialist thing. Like And I don't like to this day, right? Try and if I tried to say, hey, I don't want my kids going to school, right? They would say, well, hold on, you know what I mean? They have to go to school, they have to learn these certain things, and then even if I was homeschooling, there would be like reviews and these things are thinking. Now, does that ball of stuff that they're suggesting, sort of a requirement to, I'm going to say, make your way in today's world? Absolutely, right? But I can still acknowledge it's a colonialist package I didn't make up, that I slightly just that's imposed on everyone like a stamp. And the second you don't want stamped or you don't want your kids stamped, there's a kerfuffle. You know what I mean? It's not like you have this option to sort of opt out of the system. It doesn't really let you opt out. You see what I'm saying?
Sorry, no, go ahead.
But the only thing is, I don't know how to. Not that either of us are going to come up with a way to reconcile it, right? But you have people who are living under this reservation system, right, which is different. You know what I mean? And how to reconcile that, into into the modern, I don't want to say framework, is seems to be the problem that everybody's struggling with. Is that true, or am I just out to lunch?
Yeah, no, I would tend to agree with you. It's, how do we get to that point of reconciliation? Um, Especially in today's modern framework. Because even when you look at the treaties, Canada is a country that was born out of treaties with the First Nations people. When we look at the treaties, let's break it down as simple as you can. For First Nations people, we had our own set of treaties. They were called wampum belts, and they were very effective for us. We used them for thousands of years. You and I, we had a conflict or a disagreement. So, Greg, I would come to you, I would present a wampum belt. It would have all this pictographs on it. And you and I might sit there and talk about it for hours or maybe even days until we had this shared understanding of what that treaty was. So we had peace, we had respect. This was great. Now, when you look at the treaty system in the history of Canada, when the Europeans first came here, for about the first 250 years or thereabouts, they participated in the treaty system. And then they turned around and said, well, we don't like it because it's different. And because it's different, it makes us feel uncomfortable. So we're not doing treaties, even though we're in your land, we're not doing treaties your way anymore. We're doing treaties our way. So now all of a sudden, Greg, if I were to give you a treaty written, you're a pretty worldly guy. You might say yes to this, but if I were to give you a treaty written in Latin, would you understand that?
I actually just the kids have Dingo Lu or they have what they have an iPhone software, right, which teaches them secondary languages. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll get into it because they were doing it. And then I had to pick Latin. And the reason why I had to pick Latin is because eventually you're talking to someone, and then if you get someone who's classically trained, they'll pop something out like absurdum e reductus on you, which means like an I don't which means like an argument that's reduced to its absurd level. The problem with the Latin is it's like three words and it takes like four paragraphs to explain what they mean by it, right? So listen, I would diligently try and translate it, but I wouldn't get it on the first pass. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. So when you look at the First Nations having their treaty system replaced on them, now all of a sudden they have to negotiate a treaty in a language that they don't understand. So the question was, that fair to them? When you look at the prospect of having translators, which would make sense, yes, but then we have to realize that the translators came from those European countries such as France and Britain, so that the translators had a bias. So this whole premise that Canada was born out of treaties, but when you look at what that process looks like, you can see clearly that there was a lot of deceit, that there was a lot of fraud, that there was a lot of manipulation that took place. So when you think about it, one could say that this country was born out of a fraud in those treaties with the First Nations peoples.
You could even say that it definitely is, right? But the thing of it is, even if it definitely is born out of fraud, just for the sake of argument, let's say it's statecraft. Because the thing that's missing is I don't really believe that even if you told me, hey, this is completely negotiated and everybody understood, and they were getting, X things for this amount of land in this like telegraphed way, you're pretending it's like an armistice, right? Or sort of after a war they make sort of like an agreement, right? But the agreement isn't a free agreement among everyone involved, right? There's always the threat of what's going to happen if you don't agree to this. And I doubt it was that everyone was going to leave,
Yeah.
right? So everybody's immediately shoved into this political position where we can't pretend that any of these treaties are are negotiated in good faith between completely free people. It's not like that. They're in a political context. There's going to be consequences to saying no to this, right? For sure. They're not like I don't think if there was ever a meeting in which you said to the Anglican British colonialists, you know what, we decide this isn't working out for us. Why don't you guys just pack up? That I mean, that's just is that I don't know. I mean, I'm not a super expert in history, but I don't ever think I don't think anybody really ever thinks that was gonna happen, right? So I'm willing to accept that the original agreements are of nebulous value. Like it's part of creating this entirely legal construction, right? That says by the concepts of British common law, which is the only concept we're using, right? Everything is fair because we've made these agreements and we've done these things. It's basically a huge legal construction to sort of say, well, we're not bastards. You know what I mean? Because we follow these legal niceties, but there aren't they at the end of the day always going to be legal niceties followed up by military action if they don't come true. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. And I would hope that it would never come to that. And this is where we have to hope that cooler heads will prevail. Um,
No, I mean in the past, not now, but
um, yeah, certainly. But I think what it was is that that the indigenous people here on Turtle Island were eternally optimistic. It didn't work out for them, obviously, but I think that what it was is that the elders and the wise people and the clan grandmothers kept thinking that if we just keep talking to these people, they'll see the common sense, they'll see the logic, they'll see the light, and they'll come around. Now, as we all know through history, that didn't happen. But I think that that's where things went wrong. Is that maybe our faith was misplaced in having those settlers come over here.
they're progressives, right? They're all progressives. Okay. So they are self convincing themselves, right, that they know best. How do they know best? Well, look at these ships, look at these navies. Look at the force projection that a small country like Britain, it's smallest as you can almost imagine. Look at the force they're projecting all over the world, right? Different I mean the colonialist project is not unique to Canada. They're going wherever they can, right? And they see people attempt to uh, uh, build military resistances in Africa and stuff, right? And they just overcome it. They start putting down railroad tracks. They start building buildings that nobody's ever seen before, right? So they're self-convinced that they have a progress to the future and they know what it is. Is that like I think we can project back that that's true, right?
Oh,
So
absolutely. The divine destiny. And the interesting thing is when you look at the history of Canada, I often take it back to the doctrine of discovery. And I believe it was Pope Fernando the Fifth or the Sixth who had issued a papal bull. And as we all know, back then in Europe, when the Pope issued a papal bull, it was almost as if he were speaking for God himself. And in that papal bull, what the Pope had decreed is that to all these Christian countries going out exploring new lands, is that if you found lands inhabited by non-Christians, that you had the right, dare I say, the moral obligation to either convert them, and if they chose not to be converted, then you had the moral authority or obligation to enslave them. And if they chose not to be enslaved or converted, then you had the moral authority and obligation to kill them. So that sets the mindset, right? So when the Pope is issuing a decree like this, all the Christian countries are going, we're good to go. You know?
they're also convinced, at least some of them in their own head, right, that their religious construction means that these people's souls are going to be damned eternally, right? So I can believe that all of the, that when these people, like, it's not like their handling of someone from any other religion would be different. They would be like, no, this is the way you do things. This is the way you go off in the afterlife. Here's the moral. Here's what we consider morally appropriate, morally not appropriate actions. Whatever they come in contact with, they're not really interested in any kind of slushing debate.
Yeah.
They're not headed to being Cajun or a Métis or anything, right? They're headed for, we are going to, explain our we're going to put our footprint down wherever we go, like stamp, 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 right?
Yeah.
And that's their headspace. So it's not, it's listen, it's not how delusional that each one of them was. I don't know. We have to have like a complicated, thing, right? But they're not, the Methodists are not particularly interested in the Anglicans, right? Like they both think that that person's in some crazy, negative path, even though they agree on 99.99% of every topic imaginable, right? So it's not a surprise to me that they're not interested in other cultures, and they have this, like, they think in their heads, I assume, and I can't speak for, I don't know what an 1800s person is really like, but they have proof of it, right? They're like Anglican colonialist progressives that see their vision of how everything, should go unfolding. I mean, I'm not an expert historian, right? So I'm not, I'm not surprised that they wouldn't have, it wouldn't be surprised me that if you really sort of got a conversation with these people, all of these things are sort of like, means to an end, where at the end of the day, there is no distinct cultures. It's just, you know what I'm saying? It's just a melting pot of globular people all banging around, right? There's no distinct group anymore in their head at some point.
Yeah.
It's just everybody's all joined in. But the see, minus the history, right, which is crappy. I'm not trying to defend the history, right? Still today, the point is reconciliation from today, right? And you have territories, ill-defined, whatever. We're we're all going back to this. Oh, look, there was this document signed in 18, whatever, right? But that doesn't seem to me that ever gets you anywhere. That maybe gets you a hard border eventually, if executed enough times. It gets you a border or payments or whatever. But eventually, you have a hard border. Let's just say we can magically make up the hard border now, right? What I don't think that solves any of the problem. I mean, it solves the immediate grievance of the fact that this treaty X number of years ago is problematic, right? But we're all going to be in the same place. Like, our kids are all going to intermarry. There's nothing to stop that. So, everybody's got to figure out a way to get along from the current context, right? Is that fair? Or, like, it has to be from. My point is, minus the crappy history, how do you do what you can about that history and go forward?
Yeah. And part of the problem is and again, two different perspectives in our Indigenous world. You know, it wasn't about, when we looked at justice, justice was about healing, as opposed to the justice system that we have now, that it was European based, which is adversarial. There's going to be a winner, there's going to be a loser, and that's it. But when you look at that Indigenous way of justice, it was more about healing. And unfortunately, when we look at a lot of the different land claims and lawsuits and things that are going on between the Canadian government and Indigenous people, my question is always, why did it have to get to litigation? Why couldn't we sit down together and talk in a good way? And as Indigenous people, we should be entitled to that right of recourse when we have an issue that I might not want to go to court over something, but I would appreciate the opportunity to sit down and having a healing circle and talking about that. So, we have those two issues that you can throw into the pot that kind of muddy it up as well. Which way do we have to take, especially when you have two different parties? Or is there a way of bringing those two elements together? of having that mainstream court system and a healing system.
Listen, if you could invent it, that would be a great book. I think you should write that book and publish it out. But I think your problem is the historical the historical nature of those constructions is so long and so deep, right? Like you can get someone talking about, you'll get legal classes in how Roman law worked, right, and how that was different what was going before. These constructions are so old. That's what Latin taught me. Just doing my little, I'm by no means know any Latin, but from doing the little iPhone or whatever online learning the little bits of Latin, it's just amazing how many fragments are still with you. Like how many words you don't have to, like you get it the first time, like woman is femina. And you're like, okay, words the same, feminine, femina. And like so many like little constructions are still with us from the Latin roots of the language, right? And that's 2,000 years old. So when you go to this court system, the thing is, the modern state is based on the construction that this is the end construction, right? The state holds an absolute monopoly on violence, right? They're the 100% monopoly on violence as the state, right? And so something has to direct those elements of the state of what they should do, right? And it goes in this construction, and they follow court orders, right? They're the police are the instruments of which 99% of what happens in the world is decided, right? If you don't pay your rent, eventually something that looks like a police come gets you. You know what I mean?
Wanted to share a funny story that not so much funny. I guess I try to make the best of things. Last year, I was down at Bronte Creek, and it was I wanted to go fishing. So for me, as I mentioned in my introduction, I'm from Wickwimacong up on Manitoulin Island. So I'm not in my treaty territory. My treaty territory is up on Manitoulin Island in the northern Georgian Bay area. But I knew from, out of respect and our treaties amongst our different nations. So I'd spoken to Chief Stacy Laforme of the Mississaugas of the Credit, and I acknowledged that I was out of my treaty territory, and I asked him if I had his permission to fish on his treaty territory. And thankfully, Chief Laforme gave me that permission. So I was down there getting ready to cast, and I had two municipal bylaw enforcement officers come up, ask me if I had my fishing license. I said, I don't need one. Went on to explain that I'm First Nations, I'm exercising my treaty rights, that I have the permission of the chief of the Mississaugas of the Credit on whose territory we're on. And their response was that if I didn't stop fishing, that they would have me arrested for trespassing and having my truck towed.
Listen, it's heavy-handed authoritarianism. I don't like it, right? But there has to be some way for those officers to make the decision on if you're allowed to fish or not. And unfortunately they can't take people's words for it because it'll be abused by someone
Yeah.
else, right? I mean, I think the clash is I mean, I can see there's a civilizational clash, right? And I can completely understand that there's this concept. Well, hold on a second. The minute we go into a court of law, you know what I mean? That's got all the trappings of English law. We're all in English common law. No one's come up with anything since, right? Um, and we have this little construction of rights and things and written in English, and we're constructing on these papers. Well, 99% of the game is already gone. Certainly in terms of what you were saying in healing, the court is no interested in healing, right? The court's interest is calculating your grievances and your injury, okay, converting that into dollars, and paying someone with money,
Yeah.
and saying, you know what, that person was made whole. They got $100,000, they got $10, they got $1 million. They're good, right? And if you wanted a good point of like, even if somebody's like died, right? Like you can have a product or somebody do something so terrible that it kills one of your members of family, right? And your recourse is money. There's your money. You killed your loved one. Sorry, our mistake. Here's your 800 grand. Good day to you. But it's not a construction that can even provide uh, um, um, emotional solace or support, right? It just tries to recover the material world.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
I can agree with that. It's Another story to quickly share with you is that one of my daughters has some health concerns. So I had applied to a federal government program called Jordan's Principle. And Jordan's Principles is through the federal government, and its mandate is to make sure that Indigenous children not just survive, but thrive when they have any kind of health issues. So this was great. We got funding for it for the first year, and then the second year we were denied. I had asked why, and they had said it was too expensive. And I said, okay, so what's the value on a First Nations child's life, or what is the funding formula? Maybe I can work with you. And they denied it to the point where I had to go out and hire a lawyer in order to get the funding that my daughter was entitled to. And I had even offered them the opportunity to meet together in a healing circle with elders. I said, I'm not an adversarial person. I don't like confrontation. I'd like to think that we can sit here and work this out. And so I had requested a talking circle, and I was turned down for that, or a healing circle. And so I was forced to go to litigation, and subsequently, legally I'm bound not to give any details, but I got 70% of what they provided the first year, and only for 6 months. So actually this afternoon, I have to get back in touch with my lawyer in order to go through litigation, in order to get the rights that we're entitled to.
Yeah, this is definitely this is definitely the terrible downside to the administrative state, right? And listen, I get this point entirely. If aliens if aliens touched down, right? They landed their flying saucer and they said, "Hey, we want to have a conversation, about something you're doing in the universe." Maybe they have a no satellite policy. But like the universe is out there. You can't put a satellite up. Everyone knows this rule, right? You guys are violating the rule, and we want to have a conversation, right? Would anyone then say to this? And I'm only taking alien not as negative, just as a completely different culture trying to interact with Western society. I'm going to call it. Would you then say, okay, aliens, let's you guys got to get a lawyer, right? And we're going to go into the local magistrate's office and set up a legal case to decide whether, the Earth should have satellites, right? That would be considered bonkers. And the aliens would just be like, you can't drag us into your process. You know what I mean? You can't drag us in your process. So listen, I can appreciate I can appreciate both sides to it. I can appreciate the fact that every time you're interacting with the Canadian authorities, right, they have this legalistic, almost not every time, but at certain points, legalistic, nonconformist construction where they're like, this is how these things go. You know what I mean? But that, I mean, like, this happens to you too, right? Like, you want to build a shed on your lawn, you're hurting no one, and suddenly you're arguing and making permits, involved in petty bickering at City Hall for something that all you and your neighbors are fine
Yeah.
with, and some person has nothing to do with it is suddenly has to be appeased, to set off rules, the rules in the middle of City Hall. So I get all of that. I think but I think that the differential there is that I'm not going to say differential, but thing that I don't think that I don't know where that's coming from, because the average Canadian, if you just talk to the average person, at least that that I've run into, right, the residential school business, I think, is universally horrifying everyone, right? Like, I think there's near universal, you know horrification of that story. And obviously, something that happens to it's I'm not going to try and pretend that it's felt as deeply, right? Because it's like, someone three or four, somebody, something happens to, it's equally terrible. But it's like, sort of the circles of your life. But I don't think that there's anyone who isn't horrified by that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's a page that everybody is on. Is that this is a terrible thing?
Absolutely. And it's only because we're aware of it now. And I remember when residential schools was just being first started talked about, 10 years ago. The sad thing and the frustrating thing and the unfortunate thing and the traumatic thing is that, within our community, we knew that residential schools existed. It wasn't news to us. And so it was interesting to see everyone, the rest of the Canadian population, and we're like, really? Because we've been talking about this for years and years and years, and it was always dismissed as, oh, those are just stories, or those are just myths, or it's just exaggerations. Until we came to the conclusion that residential schools just existed in of itself. And now we're coming up with all the horrors that took place in residential schools, from children being intentionally malnourished as part of government-led medical tests and research and things like that, to having children in the residential schools forced to fight each other for the amusement of the church staff that worked there. So it's not just the fact that residential schools existed; it's the horrors that are just starting to come out now, with these. I don't want to say the word mass graves, but these unmarked graves that are being found across the country.
Right. I mean, that definitely gets you into the scale of the nightmare, right? And again, I don't think there's any there's no pushback that I've detected from anyone in the fact that you have sort of a replication almost of the Catholic Church thing, right? You had this environment, and nobody was sort of watching or believing, right? Then I assume you attracted the type of people that would do this sort of thing. It's like a place where they can, I don't know, thrive in some sick way, and the whole system mucks out into a sort of a feed forward administrative nightmare, I'm sure, to some extent, right? And this is a but this is a universal, that everyone is universally condemning this, right? The only place where you get pushback, as far as I can see, is occasionally you get a ham-handed BC bureaucrat, right, that tries to create distance um, uh, between the residential school system and like Nazi concentration camps, right? They try and get a little distance between that, and I think that's because um, they don't want a complete equivalence drawn between Canada and Nazi Germany, right? As like these two things are the same emotionally, right? And so that's why, if you ask me, you get the ham-handed kind of almost ridiculous and completely not the point. Oh, here, well, I can show you 8 guys that had a great experience. Well, fantastic. I mean, that's not relevant. At least you know what I mean. Um, and so that's the only pushback I see, and it should be. Um, I think there's universal disgust, at this history of Canada. I don't see anyone. I don't see any defenders of it.
Well, Greg, I wouldn't say defenders. I'm going to say that there is still ignorance is alive and well out there. Um, I wouldn't. I don't know if so far as to say that it's thriving, but the fact that it exists says something. Because I still meet individuals that will share statements with me like, "Well, at least they got an education. Well, at least they had people to take care of them because their parents didn't." And in this day and age, with the amount of information that's out there, if you took the time to read it, yeah, I'm still faced with comments like that to this day.
Yeah, you shouldn't be. I'm not defending that. I don't want to make excuses for people who say something stupid, right? But what I'm saying is that I think what that person is trying to communicate to you, right, is that on the brutal list of nightmarish horrors, which we're now ranking, which is a sick game in and of itself, right? Um, they're trying to catch some distance between um, but like just between Nazi style concentration camps where they're burning people alive, right? And sort of go, what they're like, I again, I don't want to try and soften what they're saying, but I think what they're trying to communicate is that these people were misguided. You know what I'm saying? And your point is, you can't be so misguided as to think fighting 2 kids in a schoolyard is a good idea, right? But they're attempting to I think they're trying to get some distance between themselves and Nazi Germany, and I think that's because everybody knows what the correct response to a Nazi is,
Yeah.
right? Like And I think that that is how I would interpret ham-handed idiocy that hopefully you don't have to, you know, suffer as little through.
Yeah,
I get that. It seems like a minimization.
absolutely. And you know, I can understand. It's hard to accept that something that you belong to, whether it's you're white Anglo-Saxon or you're from England, whether you're Roman Catholic or part of Christianity. I get it. It's hard to come to terms that something that you are a part of has such a despicable, deplorable past. That's hard to come to grasp. You know, you're typically taught all the positive things of your culture, of where you come from, about your faith, all the great things that they've done. So it's hard to come to terms that we had dark moments in our history, and that's where people struggle with it. They don't want to acknowledge that discomfort and say that, yes, I'm going to embrace this discomfort, because if I don't, I'm putting discomfort on the original people here on of Turtle Island.
I think it's involved in two conversations. I think that, and I listen, I again, the problem is we're having this like adroit conversation. You know what I mean? That you've thought about these issues. You know what I mean? And you're we're having this like high level conversation, right? The average person does not have the time or the energy to. They're just beset by everything, right? Like I can't get people interested in like local building matters that concern them up the block, right? And this is again, it's I'm not making an excuse for people. What I'm saying is what they get is they have gone from right. What's the typical vision? Because you said something in that if you are when you sort of define your identity, right? You have to you define your identity off of some sort of difference, right? Like you don't you don't get people that go around and they say, okay, well my identity, is that I can see. Just as an example, that's my identity that I can see. You can't because everyone can see that you run into in a daily life. Obviously, there are blind people, right? If you're blind, you can construct your identity off that because it's a difference of the mass, right? So I would say, to me, the majority of people don't that I've ever run into don't identify in any way with other white people because they grew up in an environment where 80% of people were white, right? So there's no identity on the sort of the white element, and they wouldn't even like that anyway, right? So the I would just suggest that to a lot of people, their major identity is this construction, if they have any group identity at all, right? The Canada being a Canadian is their identity, right? So it's like to a lot of people when this is coming, this is under siege, right? It's not even attacking like Indigenous people in general. It's like attacking the people of Turtle Island, right? This is how pointed it seems on them, right? And so when that comes to them, their defense is like don't paint everybody for the acts of a few. That's effectively their argument,
Yeah,
right?
no, exactly.
And I'm not saying that you're trying to do that. I'm just saying that's the ham-handed.
No, and I think that would be the ham-handed offense, is to look at people and just because you're of British English descent, that I should dislike you for the sins of your ancestors 300 years ago, or for me to look at my Catholic friends and say that, you know what, you should, I point fingers at you simply because you're Christian. That's kind of a ham-handed offense, and so I would never take that approach. I don't blame anyone for the sins of the past. We can't go back and we can't change history. It's important to study history so that we don't make the same mistakes. Um, but the thing is, it's important to learn, what can we learn from history? And we have to acknowledge that history has many different perspectives, not always just of the victor. That's how history is always portrayed. History is written by the victor, right? We never get to hear the person that lost or came in second place or anything like that. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Unfortunately, the Civil War breaks your
Yeah,
mold. There's lots of writing for people in the South in the Civil War, so you can find out what they thought on any topic. But I listen. I listen. I take your point, but my only point is somehow we have this residential school thing. We have universal condemnation of what happened. It's like the Catholic sexual abuse scandal, right? Everyone is reviled by that, inside, outside the church. You got little kids who are supposed to be, under someone in a position of trust, and they're abusing that trust. Everyone, especially parents, I'm a parent, you're a parent, but everyone, parent or not, intuitively that's wrong, right? This is people. Everyone knows that's wrong. If you walked up in the street and there was a 4-year-old child there, right? Your human um your human responsibility to that child is obvious to you. This kid can't just stay here, right? You know what I mean? Like this is I got to help this kid. You see what I mean? Where did that come from? You have this automatic response. This isn't right. You don't go, this is not my kid. Who left this kid? You know what I mean? You have to really be a monster, to get there, right? And so I would I would put this out as a general, not myself, but I would say the general template of people growing up. They grew up in a pluralistic society from their mind, right? And they grew up with people of all races and all creeds. You know what I mean? The cheering band was that Canada is a multicultural society, as opposed to the United States, which is a segregated society with a deep history of slavery, right? And so you don't have this baggage, is their idea, right? There's a slight smug moral superiority, let's say, in there, right? You know what I mean? And so when they were in the break room and they saw somebody different, you know what I mean? They did say hi. You know what I mean? How are you doing? And they did try and have a conversation with them. And if that person did something weird or what would be considered impolite, they did just smooth it over and say, oh, okay, well, that's a different person. That's their feeling, I think, of a lot of people, right? And then you have not it's not just it doesn't seem to people like one attack, right? It seems like a multi-phasic attack from all over the place, right? You've got anti-racism stuff. You've got all of these things are like colliding on them, right? And they somehow went from, doing their best, being nice to everybody they knew, having nice conversations, right? To somehow attach to, the evil institution of Canada that's been doing nothing but uh, um, metering out terrible results to people but with good PR, right? And so they don't like that corner. They don't want to. That's not a corner they want to turn, right? And they can't figure out how to. They can't. They cannot figure out how to express that this is nothing they support. This is nothing they wanted to. They don't know how to turn the corner on it. Someone has to figure out how to let. I mean, I know this sounds like brutal because I'm like, somebody has to figure out how to let white people turn the corner on these terrible things. You know what I mean? But they can't figure out how to turn the corner themselves,
Yeah.
right?
That's going to be a struggle, and it's not going to happen overnight. I don't think that it's going to be easy, but I always like to be an optimist, and I want to acknowledge that things are changing, kind of at a glacial speed, perhaps. But things are changing. The fact that Greg, that you and I are having this conversation today, that's progress. This probably wouldn't have been food for topic 5 years ago or 10 years ago. The fact that we are, having these conversations in schools, educating our students now. I was so pleased. I was new to Burlington, and I was driving down Plains Road, and forgive me, there was I can't remember the name of the church on the south side, and they had some signs up about acknowledging and praying for the Indigenous children, and there was orange tapes on the fence and everything like that. And I'm like, wow, that wouldn't have happened 5 or 10 years ago. So, as much as there's a lot of discontent within the Indigenous community and people are still upset, and I understand that, we also have to acknowledge that as a society, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, we're all moving forward in a good way.
The kid thing, this is the I think the tricky part with the kid thing. This is always my people think about what they're doing here, right? In that when you have the kids don't have themselves divided up in these camps naturally. I've never seen them self-divide up. Or if they self-divide up, they'll divide up on some absolutely weird thing, like I like this toy and this other kid likes this toy, and they'll sort of divide up that way, right? And I think the problem that I've never figured out is when, especially this goes more to the anti-racism training, because I don't really know what's done on the Indigenous front or not, is that if you go into these environments and you start saying, okay, well, here's the anti-racism training, there's systemic racism. Okay, I can buy that. You can make a structure that has no racist rule in it that still has racist output for sure. I believe that. I can come up with examples of that. The and then you turn the corner and you start going, okay, well, this other person who's in the class is in this completely different dimension. They've had a completely different experience. They've experienced racism. They've experienced this. I'm like, okay, I'm still with you in uh, uh, I'm still with you in the point of you're trying to bring this story up and make this person's a burden of expressing what they feel easier, right? My only concern is always it seems very hard now not to turn the corner and to sort of wedge them and say, no, well, you're in group one and that's in group two. And actually, you guys are completely different, right? You live in different worlds with different sensitivities. And then we put the sensitivity bracket in. Okay. Well, now there's a whole bunch of things you have to watch with this other group
Yeah.
to not trigger the wrath of the administrators, right? And then my big fear is if it's not handled extremely delicately, the kids just go, okay, well, I won't talk to that person. Problem solved.
Yeah. And that's not the way to do it either. And that's where I think something like a healing circle, that opportunity for people to come together and to share those different perspectives. And, at the end of the day, I don't have to agree completely with your perspective, Greg, but you know what? I can have a better understanding and appreciation of how you feel so that when I communicate with you, I can be more sensitive to those things.
Well, listen. The good news is I'm not sure how I feel, and I'm not sure how I internally feel. I don't think anybody is this like, rock solid, rock solid interpretation. And listen, this is why this is if you want results, I don't want at all, right? Like not for me, but just for the people in general, right? I think the stupidest thing we can do in the world is start getting white people to see themselves as a race. I think this is the world's most terrible idea that we're gonna start splintering off into groups, right? And say, okay, well, there's this mass of you guys left. You know what I mean? Maybe you're a group. Maybe you have some communal affiliation or some bonds to each other. Maybe you are a political entity that lives or dies. You know what I mean? And this is my only fear with the my only my only my only I won't say my only fear, but it strikes me as you could get into this dangerous, not dangerous, but much worse place. I want everybody to be glued to the idea that they're Canadian, not the Indigenous. Well, the Indigenous people can come up with their own definition. You know what I mean? Of how Canadian or not Canadian they are, right? I think that's the only fair sentiment there that I can come up with, right? And then so I can separate them as a special group. Like that's definitely a special group. It's not one minority among many. It's got a different class of historical grievance, right? I'm going to say that's fair. Um, but I don't think we should bind people away from the idea that they're all Canadians, because that's the connective tissue of why people care, right? If the same residential school situation, which is worse if anything from the states, came to people's attention, it would be very easy for them to go, well, that's the states.
Right.
And it's really just it's really just a bizarre administrative line in which you're like, oh, that's nothing to do with me, right? Um, and so that's my only concern with the kids. I'm glad it's not on me,
Yeah.
because there's incredibly positive things like the healing circle, all the Iroquois Nation stuff, um, Absence of the Sacred, book behind me. I don't. Oh, you can see the title. It's got all this great stuff about how certain Indigenous groups had this tradition that in a conversation circle, you don't contradict anybody, you don't challenge them, you say your understanding of the problem. You know what I mean? And it rotates around. You don't descend into debate
Yeah.
wars, right? It's just not done. All this stuff is fantastic. You know what I mean? And then when you get to this other stuff, I'm not sure. I don't know what ages are appropriate, but I can't imagine what's a grade two going to do with this material? That's what I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah. I think a couple of things is a how it's presented to them, um, and how much relevance that you give that teaching that you want to give those children. You know, I do think it's possible to do it in grade two. Um, you know, as an example, like every class I start off with, even with kindergartens, my first question is it okay to be different? And so we just start having these conversations, and I pull out little stuffies, and I get them to see little differences and things like that. Um, and just to get that as a conversation going with them, right? And always reinforcing to the children that these teachings, these kinds of teachings, are important. That are not just important, I would say sacred, right? Understanding that we're all different, and that we can coexist. And I think that those kind of conversations need to take place sooner, at a much younger age, with school age children.
Yeah, I think now the one. I don't think you're saying this, but I'm just
But
bringing it up to your attention, right? So there's a dichotomy between you're coming and you're saying it's kind of this weird. This gets to this cultural appropriation
yeah,
aspect, right? Where you can come and say, okay, well, there's this body of knowledge, other way of thinking about
yeah.
it, right? But and you tell us the kids, I like that. You can. There's nothing wrong with another perspective, especially that takes the grindy edges off the Britain's capitalist modern sort of it could get into this completely unfeeling, unhuman way and sort of chop forward like a brainless cyborg, just different different administrative bodies implementing stuff. And at the end of the day, you're like, could we not have just gone to the end of this process? Like, why was all this crap necessary for some kid to get dialysis? Like, what is the problem? You know what
Hmm.
I mean? I just picked that example out of the air, but um, uh, we got that thing. But so how do you avoid that? I'm not saying I have the answer to this, but I do think we have to somehow figure out how to avoid going, okay, well, there's this alternative history, right? There's this alternative way of thinking. And then if one of the kids gets like excited about that, you know what I mean? And says, oh, well, I'm excited about what this person said. You know what I mean? I'm excited to look at it. People don't start going, I'm not saying you're doing this, but say, oh no, that's not your culture,
Hmm.
right? That's not your culture. You're back in camp one. Sorry. You know what I mean? We got like a preview of the other culture. But if I tried to start trying to make it my culture, you'd be told, no, that's not your thing. I mean, is that a problem with the kids? You deal with them. I don't, so I don't even
Yeah.
know.
The way that I look at it is that when we're looking at certain teachings and things like that, and people choose to embrace that rather than having it imposed on them. So if they choose to embrace that because they're curious, they want to know more, then as a traditional person, you try to do your best that they have a true, deep understanding of it. And that when we deliver that teaching, it's not just cognitively, but we do it in what we call a good way, which is both with our mind and our heart, that we pass that information on. So it's not just processing it, I understand it here, but we understand it here again. Again, that's just a different way of looking at things in an Indigenous worldview. But if you can do that, then what I call it is I have gifted you that knowledge. So then you're not appropriating it. So if I were to share a teaching with you and I felt confident that you understood it both here and in here, I would say, okay, Greg, I am gifting you that teaching and you are free to share it. As opposed to you looking something up on Google about Indigenous culture or something like that, and then taking it from Google with very little context and understanding, and going out and saying that, oh, I know about Indigenous people because bop 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 bop, right?
No, I can. No, I see what you're saying there. What you're saying is there's a difference um, between someone, because there's been a long tradition of kind of like indoctrinating somebody. I don't say doctor, but like welcoming someone to the tribe. I know tribe is the right word, but group of people, and saying, well, we're going to give you a name. right, of an elder or something, right, and there's a ceremony, we're like not saying indoctrinating, we're grouping you in with the
Yeah.
tribe, right? That's a different structure than somebody who read 10 books
Yes.
on people, and they're like, hey, I'm part of this thing too. I get that. And listen, to me, there's a massive like schism between kids and adults, right? So if you said, and this, I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm just asking because you get into this Moana thing, right? The kids watch Moana, right? They're excited about Moana. She's like this powerful female character. And they're like, hey, for Halloween, I want to go as Moana, right? And I'm like, okay, well, you're 8, right? You go as whatever you want. I'm not going to tell you who to go and not go as Moana for Halloween. And so I have in my head a complete different schism between what a 8-year-old would innocently do, you know what I mean, versus a 25-year-old drunken college student, you know what I mean? And I have a barrier there. I don't consider the children able to culturally appropriate anything. They're just building their mental frameworks on whatever's around. You know what I mean? Is that general? Do you run into people that think differently on those topics?
Oh yeah, there's a broad spectrum of how people think on that. They think it's nice. They think that they're honoring somebody that's indigenous or wherever the cultural appropriation is taking place. And the thing is, in a child's innocence, they're still learning what is right and wrong. So, when cultural appropriation takes place without any context of understanding how that might impact people, well, now at the age of 8, we've already introduced the fact that it's okay to do practice cultural appropriation. So next year, why can't I do it? Or maybe we start bridging out into different aspects of cultural appropriation from different cultures to the point where it becomes normal. So I think that as adults, as parents, we need to educate ourselves as to the importance of understanding what cultural appropriation is, so that we can teach it to our children.
I get what you're saying there, right? But okay, if you, and I'm saying you yourself are in the
Yeah.
sensitivity, right? But if you turn that knob up to high sensitivity, right? Like Western culture is just a mismatch of whatever they find. We're not we're not like there's this is this they're not like whatever they can kind of eat up, commercialize, and like sort of make into a thing is like instantly made into a thing, right? So if you turn the sensitivity up to 2 million, right, and the kid says, "Oh, I want to be Moana," you say, "Well, that's not you. You're not Moana," right? Because they're excited about all of the ideas they saw in the film. Pocahontas might be a little bit closer. They're excited about. They go, "Oh, well, this character is close to nature. I like nature. I love going to cottage. I'm more excited about nature than I am about my house. If you have a cottage, I'm sure you've seen this with kids. They love the outdoors and nature, and they just play in the water for 4 hours straight, freezing cold water. You're like, I'm not getting it, and they're happy as a clam, right? And they sort of see this movie or see this thing like, well, there's this other character. They have a raccoon, a raccoon friend. I'd love a raccoon friend, and so they're honor. I get what you're saying. They're honoring this through through copying it. It's like, replication is the sincerest form of flattery. And if you sit there and you go, well, hold on, that's not your thing. 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 Right. What I don't understand is what at the end of the day is your thing? Like what can the kids do that isn't really just stolen from somewhere? Right. Because it is all really just stolen from somewhere, right?
Well, I think that there's enough things that exist in the world today, that you can choose from, that does not necessarily represent a culture. Dress up as a raccoon, dress up as a tree, dress up as lightning, as anything that you want. But what I would say is to stick away from somebody's culture. Right, and sometimes that can get a little difficult, as well. But just really trying to understand that how might that impact other people. You might think that you're honoring them, or I think it's really cool. I think it's really cute and things like that. But you need to ask those people from that culture. How do you feel? about it.
Right. Listen, I'm with you there, but I don't think I think at some point you can sit there and say, my problem is the sort of like millennial, you know what I mean, who grows up in the West, right, is completely devoid of deeper spiritual appreciation,
Yeah, yeah,
while simultaneously, when they tried to emulate anyone with deeper spiritual appreciation that they could see, obviously, they went, no, that's not your thing. Sorry, that's not your thing. That's not your thing. Right. Until they're left with their thing being Paw Patrol, which is a nice show, but it's not, there's no spiritual element to Paw Patrol that's going to take you through your teens.
right.
Right. I don't know. I'm not saying that it's never come up. So I've never said they could do it or not do it. Right. But if they would do it, if they would do it, I would be hard pressed to go, no, 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 that's not your thing, because they're clever. I mean, Disney specifically doesn't represent a specific people. They make this weird amalgam of ideas, you know what I
Yeah.
mean, that sort of represents sort of represents those people. I would be I would feel a little bit like if they said, "Hey, I want to do this because I connect this person or culture as being close to nature." Right? And I mean, this has existed from day one. We've always had colonialists sort of go, screw this. I'm more attracted, you know what I mean, to indigenous communities. You always had this kind of weird back and forth, right? And sort of go whole hog and be accepted in. This is, the story as old as time. And that I think is the needle, which is very difficult. It goes with all of them. It's not just an
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
indigenous thing. You don't want your culture tokenized or pantomimed. I get that completely, right? Um, but with kids, I think it's I don't want to tell them that whatever is attracting them to this idea, whatever's they've got a little whiff of something about this attracts me, right? And go, no, no, this isn't your thing, right? Stay in your lane. You know what I mean? Your lane is, your lane. We can dress you as a British admiral. You know, I mean, that's like terrible. I wouldn't do that either, right? So that's because that's your thing. Your thing is, you can have a British toga and an admiral suit, um, and go like that, because at a certain age, you're right. When they're little kids, they'll say, "I'll be a tree, I'll be a rock," right? But once they start trying to grind their identity a little bit more down, they're going to say, "What am I going to be into?"
yeah.
Right? I love nature. Like, they'll just sort of pick this out of the air. Oh, I love nature. I'm really into nature. Another kid will say, I'm really into robots. I just love these robots, right? I don't know how to thread that needle, but I'm just asking you so you can um, tell us your perspective in the sensitivity to sort of the trope of Halloween costume on kids,
Yeah.
which I think you've done
Thank
admirably.
you, thank you. The other thing, what some people don't understand is that, if we're looking at the example of costumes at Halloween in terms of cultural appropriation, and oftentimes at powwow, people will refer to the clothing that we wear as costumes, and they're not costumes; they're regalia. They're very sacred items. You do ceremony for them when they're created. It's believed that they have the spirit of the person who made it in them. So they're seen as sacred items. So, it's one thing to see somebody dressed up in a loincloth holding a bow and arrow, which I think is bad enough. But then you might have somebody wearing, a female wearing a jingle dress, which is a medicine for Indigenous people. So sometimes people are, it's not just the cultural appropriation; they're getting into the realm of sacred items as well, with no knowledge of that. So I think that that's part of a larger conversation as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. But but in the constellation of I'm just talking kids now,
Yep.
okay? I'm aware that a 25-year-old university student is capable of degrading anything we give them purchase on, right? But I'm just saying with kids, they'll when they sort of pick a doctor or they pick a lawyer or they pick, you know what I mean? They are sort of picking a medicine, you know what I mean? A traditional. They're saying, "Oh, maybe I would like to be that." Right? They don't understand the path to that. I get that. Or maybe they can't do it, or maybe they can if they devoted themselves to it. But that's kind of the idea, right? They're like, oh, I want to go and be this thing and do this thing. So I get the sensitivity on both sides. I don't have any magical answer how to deal with that one, but I can see how, especially in older people, it can instantly degrade to brutal satire or tokenism. You know what I mean? In a really disrespectful way. Um, I'm just for 6-year-olds dressing as Moana. That's my bumper sticker. But you're right. And then there's old enough. You're like, listen,
Yeah, well, you would think so, and our Prime Minister Trudeau is a great example of that with his blackface that he did a couple of years ago, and there was a grown up, educated adult, who's clearly appropriating someone else's culture, and didn't have the wisdom or the knowledge or the wherewithal to even consider that back then.
yeah, listen, it's brutal. I'm not going to make any apologies for it. It's not good. I mean, you have to sit there and you got to think: is there anyone in this circle of is there no one who just put their hand up and said, "Could you just think for 10 minutes? You know what you're doing here." Um, I just assumed it was. Listen, if the most what do you want to call it? Positive reading is he just thinks he's taking the costume to the limit. You know what I mean? But that's not really. You do things common sense, or not even if you're common sense, because I see how perhaps I don't know. You could just be in this other space where you think this is so cool and people are going to be outraged or shocked,
Yeah,
or you know what I mean. Kids do a lot of stuff for attention. That's the other thing, right? I mean, but the problem is he's not a kid. That's what's so horrifying. A 19-year-old kid does it. I'm like, I got it. You know what? If you're well, not nowadays, but if you were a 19-year-old kid in 1974 and you want to
yeah,
be president, I'd be like, okay, it's stupid. People do stupid things, and the thing which I think is very positive is we got to, which I mean, you seem more than willing to do. Got to figure out a way to get people out of mistakes.
yeah,
When kids do something stupid, we have to figure out a way to let them up.
yeah.
Somehow come back to the Twitter as well. And one of the points I was thinking about earlier is that if you went to Joseph Brant Park and you said we're going to have some kind of whatever the appropriate ceremony is, in honor of Indigenous children, I think you would find. I mean, so many people would come, it would break down.
Hmm.
Like if you just advertise this thing in a week, said we're doing this ceremony because everybody would like to see. When I say cleansed of it, no one can be cleansed of it, okay? But register their deep felt horrification of this in some way. They don't know how to express that they're sorry this thing happened to someone else, even though I mean the people are dead, right? Hopefully, I mean not hopefully, but um, hopefully the people who actually did this are dead or would come to justice soon.
Yeah,
The 90% of people who weren't even alive when this is happening, or whatever percentage it is, they want some way to register their horror and say this is not me, right? I want to register that I'm Canadian, not me, but one in general, Canadian. But this does not represent a candidate that I'm interested in, past or present.
yeah, absolutely.
And to somehow thread that needle. And I know that becomes like this. I assume I shouldn't say I know. This becomes this ridiculous, heavy lift to say, oh, that's what this group needs. When the other group is going, well, hold on a second. I'm still getting. I still can't go fishing. I'm still, I still got these practical irritations. And you're talking about, this grief. But everybody I know is horrified and wants to express in the deepest level, that they can without seeing fish. That this is a universally horrifying thing to happen, and they want no part of it. That's my reading on.
I think you're absolutely right on that, Greg. And I think that a lot of people are starting to um, aim for threading that needle. There is a lot of conversation going on amongst the Indigenous community and our allies of really promoting Orange Shirt Day this year, which is, I believe, September 30th. There's a lot of people that are going to be asking our allies to have little decals on their car, to wear an orange shirt. What we're trying to do in the Halton area in the Indigenous community, in the lead up, probably about 2 weeks before Orange Shirt Day, we're going to be giving out those little orange ribbons, like survey markers, with a little piece of information on it about what Orange Shirt Day is and what it means. And so we're going to be asking people to tie that orange ribbon to somewhere on their vehicle to kind of promote Orange Shirt Day. And it's really nice to see how things are slowly coming together, but they're coming together. So I really look forward to seeing what Orange Shirt Day is going to look like in the Halton region this year.
Oh, listen, I don't think there's any. I think that's great stuff. Um, and we just got to figure out some way. And again, it sounds horrible to be like, we got to figure out some way to pull some positive message out of this whole thing, because there's nothing positive about it. But there, I think particularly to the kids, so just internationally, like if you go listen to someone who reads an international paper, right? The article goes like this: there's been this terrible mass grave discovery, right? Um, and then the whole article is a series of ever greater pylons, right? It's like, well, and this person sort of says, this represents, like, because it'll be like, oh, we found this, these unmarked grave things, right? There's no context on it, and then you'll get a quote from someone saying, this is not just a school, this is straight up genocide, right? And so people are like, okay, I know what genocide is. I've been to a concentration camp. And then the next is a political leader saying, oh, well, Canada is a systemically racist country. You know what I mean? And then so like, if you just read this article externally, right, you get the impression that it's again, it's like sort of it's like there's no defender of Nazi Germany, barely any even in Germany, right? um but now that's Canada, and so when you get this point, it's like the tarnishing of Canada as an entity via this, because people care about it. It's not because they don't care that this has happened. If it was people they didn't care about, or they had no emotional connection with, they'd say, well, crappy stuff happens all over. You know what I mean? It's because it seems dear to them that they care. The tarnishing of the Canadian brand is real. And my only fear is, it's very easy for people to say, okay, well, then I'm not Canadian,
Right.
right? My group is something else. Forget it. Canada's got nothing to do with me. It's just a place I live. And you get more and more minority groups, negative to them, because when you're first in a country, if you don't speak the language, you got to cling to someone. I get this completely. Well, you do. I mean, it's not, you know, I don't even know what space they're in, but it seems to me even less likely that they start saying, like, if you turn it, which I'm not saying you're doing, but a lot of people a spin a continual straight line narrative, right? That Canada was sort of born in evil, bathed in evil. It's an evil construction from beginning to end, right? It's like, okay, you can make that construction up. Let's say you get everybody to believe it, right? They want nothing to do with Canada, right? It's a terrible country. I want nothing to do with the government. I'm going to wash my hands with the whole thing, right? Well, what other replacement are you going to stick now that links people together and makes them feel they have common cause?
See, for me, Greg, as I say, I don't consider myself Canadian. My nationality is Ojibwe Anishinaabe, um, and I don't celebrate Canada Day. I acknowledge Canada Day because it's a historical fact that no one can change. In 1867, the Dominion of Canada was created. It's a historical fact. I acknowledge that, but I certainly don't celebrate it. Um, and it's it, it's just a whole challenge of trying to get non-indigenous people to just look at things differently, right? To look at it from, I've had conversations about racism that I've experienced, and people will say, well, yeah, I came here from another land and I have experienced racism. I said, racism is bad any way you cut it. I said, but it's another experiencing it in your own home, in your own land. If I were to say an unkind word to you, Greg, out on the street, that's pretty bad. But for me to insult you in your own home takes it to a higher level. And that's where I feel that a lot of non-Indigenous people don't quite understand. Well, we've all experienced hard times. Well, my people have experienced oppression. Yeah. And you left your country because you didn't want to keep experiencing oppression. As Indigenous people, you know, unless I can file a refugee claim in another country, I'm stuck here. Right? This is what I have to live with.
No, I got it. But you're stuck here too, right? I mean, like when you're an average white person who grew up in Canada, you're like stuck here
Yeah.
too. There's no place for you to go. This is your, this is where you grew up too. But that's why the interest, like that's why you have the interest of people who sincerely want this sore spot reduced as much as
Yeah.
possible. Sore spot is a minimization, but you know what I mean. They would love to come to some kind of I don't want to say agreement, but some kind of place where there was, I mean, it sounds cartoonish, but acknowledgement that everyone has done what they can. You know what I mean? In the current ferment, and like you noted, for example, you have like this tension between the historic leadership and the sort of colonialist imposed band council, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I can see that. I mean, I can imagine how divisive that is internally.
Mhm.
Like I can cast myself that you're like the official leader, and then other, because this is from internal to community, say, no, I'm going to run for band council, right? And then once we're band council, do the money's coming through us? You know what I mean? We have a construction of what can be done and what done, and so we'll hold on. And this is like, I can see how this instantly creates this internal rift. But you tell me if it does or not. I imagine it would.
When we looked at our traditional forms of governance, what a lot of people don't know is that, well, first of all, that most Indigenous communities were matriarchal societies. And again, so you have the difference in the patriarchal society back in Europe when they were coming over. So when the Europeans came over here with that patriarchal perspective, they refused to actually engage with the clan grandmothers, which is who they should have, because they were part of the governance. Um, and then, after dismissing them, then changing our form of governance from hereditary chiefs, right? Well, no, that doesn't work for me because you know what, Greg, you're a hereditary chief, but you ask too many questions and you push back and you don't know your place. So, Greg, you're a nice guy, but we don't work together. So, I'm getting Bill over there. And Bill and he doesn't push back. He doesn't ask a lot of questions. So I'm changing your form of governance here, and I'm going to put Bill in to get things going. And then going on from here, we're going to vote who's the most popular person. And again, that comes down to a lot of times who controls the purse strings, right? Whereas the other thing is that in traditional forms of governance, especially when you're looking at clan grandmothers and even hereditary chiefs, they were prepared, they were identified at a young age, maybe in their teens, that they could see that diamond in the rough, and they would probably spend the next 30 to 40 years mentoring them and preparing them how to be patient, how to learn how to build consensus, how to make decisions not just for yourself, but for your whole community, to think of 7 generations ahead. So, when we had our traditional leaders, they spent probably 30, 40 years being prepared specifically for that role of being a leader in our governance, and all that was taken away from us. So, what we're seeing now is an element within the Indigenous community across Turtle Island, recognizing that as part of being a sovereign nation, that they should have that ability to pick their own form of governance. And I think that that's going to see. I think that that's going to be something that you're going to be seeing across the country over the next couple of years, is a push towards that. Or how do we get back to that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you're going to have to negotiate that internally, but I think that there will be there that the this is the external problem. It's just, I think this is a technical governmental problem, right? That Canada is still going to have like they're going to still have a controlled domain over a large number of things like currency, et cetera, the bank system, et cetera, right? They're if there is ever an internal appeal, like an appeal from any group of indigenous people anywhere, right? And the appeal goes like this: well, there's 60% of us, right, who are not represented by this traditional governments. We don't want to be part of this traditional governance, right? That short circuits them. It's like a broken
Yeah.
robot that they can never deal with
Yeah.
because they will sit. And I'm not suggesting this is even a common thing or would even occur, right? I'm just saying this scenario will be unresolvable by them. They have to retreat into, nope, there was an election. This is the person in charge.
Yeah.
We can be sure that the majority of people, even for bad reasons, want this person elected,
Yeah.
right? They can't. They're gonna short circuit on, if you get these, which you seem to have agreements, especially in the West. I'm no expert, but you seem to have disagreements between the band council has done something, right? You know what I mean? They've agreed to this, and then the hereditary chiefs disagree with this, right? When that short circuit occurs, right? They can't listen to both group, and they're going to sit there and say, okay, well, the general principle is the majority of people in this group should get what they want,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's going to be a heck of a
Yeah.
fight, because if ever there's a moment where 60% of people are not getting what they want over the indigenous leadership, right, they can immediately appeal to relief from the government of Canada and say, no, that we don't want this person. This person's not democratically representative, and that's the Western's mechanisms solution for everything,
Yeah.
right? If there's groups of people, they all want different things, minus a small constitutional set of things that we won't allow to be encroached on, right? Uh, 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 we'll free ball. So that's a mess. I don't. That's a huge mess. There's no. So it's just as a question. I don't. Hopefully this is not an offensive question, but I think other people were wondering it. So did the traditional leadership not run for band council? Why don't they run for that and win that? And now both systems are unified.
Well, if you're running for band council, then you're almost going contrary to your traditional way of how things came about. So it's like you're buying into it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
That point is crystal
Yeah.
to me.
And it's so difficult because there are so many great chiefs that are elected chiefs, and council members, that carry themselves in a good traditional way. They know their teachings. They go to the elders and the knowledge keepers in their community and still seek counsel from them. They will go and speak to the clan grandmothers, for advice. So it's great to see that we have those leaders that are currently, bringing that. I'm the chief administrator. I manage all the purse strings here, but I can do it in a way that still represents my traditions and my people in a good way.
Right. No, I mean that's a huge needle to
Yeah.
thread. Congratulations to anyone who's making that happen. But I do seem to think that there's a potential massive dust up available when these things go in collision, and the because the one thing though is, you can just think about it, right? If you were in any traditional space, the main thing about traditional space is you can't escape the traditional space, right? Like you can't definitionally, like, if you are completely reviled by everyone in your community, you know what I mean? You can't exist like that, even if you're not um, um, banished. You know what I mean? Even if you're not banished from the group,
Yeah.
you can't. You don't want to be in a group. You have to see these people every day, right? There's no relief from this group of people, so you can't really. There's no profit in being a universally despised, character, right? Like, who wants to be the chief and universally despised? You see what I mean? There's like a protection there automatically.
In answer to your question, I would say President or former President Trump, maybe.
Yeah, well, he's not universally despised. He's not universally despised. He's he's despised. He's listen. He's the least despised person running for office in that
Yeah.
year. I would have to say. But anyway, let's not get into U.S. politics. Okay, so I did have a couple questions. So you came to your attention that you did a Burlington presentation on Ryerson, basically. Is
Yeah.
that not true? And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that because I had somebody else in the show with opposite thoughts. So it seems good to have you here and balance
Oh
it out.
yeah, absolutely. Um, and it's interesting how we look at history, and people of my age, and I'm going to suggest your age as well, Greg. We were taught by a lot of books that were written from a Eurocentric perspective. And again, to the spoils goes the victor. They get to write history. And so when they started looking at people like Prime Minister MacDonald and Duncan and Ryerson and all these other people back in that age, they were glorified. They were put up on a pedestal. The things that they had accomplished, put them above everyone else. And that was what we knew back then, I guess, from a Eurocentric perspective. I'm sure if, back then, if the perspective of Indigenous people mattered and somebody had asked, I'm sure someone in the Indigenous community would say, no, I don't like that guy. He's not a good guy. This is what he's doing, despite all the other things that he might have accomplished. So when we look back at history, and let me be perfectly clear, I'm never ever about erasing history. Okay. His name will forever be in history books of the different things that he has accomplished. But we're going to be looking at it in a new light now. We're going to be looking at it in a different context. That yes, that he brought formal education to Ontario and the education system and the books and everything like that. That's a historical fact. You can't take that away from him. But you also have to balance that out with the true context that he was one of the architects of residential school. And I can say that without getting upset, without getting emotional. That's just a fact, right? So, my point is, let's not erase this man from history, because if we do that, then we're apt to have it happen again. But let's just put it into a larger context. And, there's a difference between acknowledging and venerating or celebrating. And I think that that's where, a lot of people get upset is that, we could look at Hitler and say that he accomplished a lot of great things. And some people, a great sense of nationalism and what he did, and what he did for the economy. And some people could argue that, right? But when we look at the larger context, I don't see many statues of that man and up anywhere. They might exist, I don't know, but we don't.
They did. They did. They were just taken
Yeah,
down.
yeah, right. So as we learn more and more about history, and we are able to put people's perspectives into it, or into context, I should say, then we start to have to say, maybe this is not the best path of following, because what you're doing is you're elevating him. We need to acknowledge him. You know, I got asked my opinion on a statue on Sir John A. Macdonald, and I said, keep it up. It's part of history.
See, I'm going to split John A. Macdonald because John A. Macdonald is my, and I'm not a historian, so correct me if I'm wrong. He's involved in he's involved in the idea that the contraption is back. The whole society of Indigenous is backwards, and they're and therefore prime for erasure. So if you want to take his name off of school or park, I can see my way, to there. The only two tidbits of Ryerson, and if I've got the history wrong, please correct me. But the only two tidbits of why I'm pained to let Ryerson go is like I believe when he was a Methodist preacher and he was working with the Mississaugan, right? He was he learned to speak the language. He was doing sermons in Mississaugan. He got taken into the tribe. He got a Mississaugan indigenous name, Cheechak, I believe is his indigenous name, right? And so the reason why I'm more pained to give away Ryerson, right, is he does seem to have this outreach. You know what I mean? and and he's from the 18 whatever 20s to 30s when there's, my understand, historically not as much conflict as later. And so I I when you recontextualize it, I would almost like it recontextualized as, you know, him sort of farming with Mississaugan on. It seems to me I'd like to scrape a unified story out of that, um, because my understanding of the history, and this is like, this is just what I've been told. So again, if I'm bad on the history, let me know. Right? Is that he is on record at thinking the Mississaugan credit thing is crap, and he was trying to petition. He was in England trying to petition Queen Victoria. There are historical records where I don't get the impression that he has any interest or um, that his version of which he calls industrial schools, as again I understand history, I'm not trying to start a flap or whatever, um, is that what he thinks he's doing is they think that they're creating an agricultural school which is optional for people who've already done their sort of elementary school to learn European style farming for the purpose of allowing communities of indigenous to be set up where they can now farm and keep their culture because the hunting, the roaming is becoming impossible, right? Because the reservation is too small, and they have to come through. So I'm pained to give up Ryerson because when you look through the historical documents, at least the ones I've seen and has been explained to me, he doesn't seem a character antagonistic to the indigenous of that time.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Again, and then I would always come back to the point of references. Where did you get that information from? The authors of those books, the authors of those articles. The other thing is that when we look at him and other people in Canadian history, and as people do some research, and oh, he's not a bad guy, and he hung around, and oh, guess what? He even had some Indian friends, and he even knew a couple of the words and everything like that. In a nutshell, they were great used car salesmen. Of course, I love you, Greg. You're my best friend. Let me hang out with you. But there was always there was always an end game to it. I'll play nice. I'll give, I want you to believe in me, Greg. I want you to think that I'm not a bad guy. I have your best interests at heart. But the end game is that I don't like you, Greg, and I want to get rid of you, and I want you to be exactly like me.
I get that point, but I just don't think that. And so you have a great point, right? Which is when you is that you can't really, if you take a secondhand depiction of the thing, right? I mean, he's a Methodist minister. He's trying to convert people to be Methodist, right? Well, I mean, I think most of them are identified as Methodist just to get through the day, right? Because just put your hand up and say Methodist, and he hates the Anglican colonialist, right? So there's the other angle of of this in the day. But I will say you can read what he wrote, like I have it, I can send it to anybody you want, which is straight from the archives of what he wrote in. And I think that there is a problem with people just taking that document and picking stuff, you know what I mean? Picking lines out of it and saying, well, there's this, there's this, there's this. But I will, if you want to argue he's a paternalistic progressive, he's a paternalistic progressive, right? But it does, like the last line of it. I mean, this is his writing. Not to drag in the whole argument, but does say, wouldn't it be great if we could see members of our school owning some of the biggest farms in Canada, right? And it's I don't know that anybody writing that in 18 whatever is doing anything more than responding how they, you know, I can take his words as he wrote them and say, well, this is what this guy thinks,
Yeah.
right? Um, and there's actually another little tidbit where one of his, so the person that's trying to get him to do this, he's taking his time, and then he writes Ryerson a letter in which he was like, hey, you got to hurry up with this because there's different people in the government, right, that want nothing more than to see, the Indians fall flat in their face, and this is like they don't want this project to go, and I need you to support it. So um, I can. I'm not suggesting that there's I don't know, a universal truth that I can see that other people can't see,
Yeah.
right? But I just with the Ryerson story, I'm like, if we could just cram some narrative out. There. It seems to me that we should be able to make a positive that we're not going to be able to make at McDonald's. There's no happy story with McDonald's.
Well, I've had people debate me on that. They have still found some things that they appreciated, and the man was great and elevated and things like that. And I just said, that's your perspective. That's fine. But the other thing with Ryerson, and I remember the quote that you had mentioned about, wouldn't it be great, if the not quoting it, but the Indigenous people were to own farms and businesses. Yeah, but all they had to do in order to do that was to give up their language, their values, their cultural identity, everything that they are, and only then would they be capable of even doing that.
Yeah. So listen, if you want a damning quote from that, like to be fair of it, right? Like 80% of it is not this, it's just a description, but he is a Methodist preacher, right? So there is this part where he sort of goes, if you want a damning statement from history, is he sort of goes, um, well, the Indigenous are more emotional than Europeans, and so they're going to need religion to tamp down their emotion, right? The only thing is, I'm sure he thinks that of everyone because again, he's a Methodist preacher, right? So I doubt there's too many people he considers aren't being pious enough, right? And don't get me wrong, the you know what I mean? Like, so don't get me wrong. The curriculum sounds like a disaster. It's got like 2 hours of prayer and whatever. But I do think that there is a dissection between these type one. He never calls them residential schools. They're called
Yeah.
industrial schools. Is what he thinks he's doing. Um, I do think we can make my understanding historically is there is a bifurcation to what he's talking about. There's only two or three of them ever in the world that are under Ryerson's watch of what he thinks is going to be created, and then it is listen you minus the terrible handling of the children, which is terrible by any stretch of the imagination, right? On top of that terror, right? The second revisitation of the industrial schools from almost everybody I've heard of, right, is to cleanse these people of their culture, quote unquote, for their own good, which is terrible to begin with. But under the Ryerson school, I believe you could talk your that was a sincere my understanding of the history, at least has been presented to me, is there's a bifurcation between type one industrial schools and type two residential schools. They don't really overlap. And the part that Ryerson is thinks that he's contributing to. He raised a 4-page thing. That's his contribution to it. Is supposed to be a completely optional, almost post-secondary additive for the purpose of. I mean, the government. Another screw job. The government's supposed to give land for the graduates of this,
Right.
which they completely, obviously, never do, thus screwing the whole thing up, and then that collapses. I just. Anyway, I just think I wish there was a scrap that everyone could get together and like, even before the residential schools get in 1820, because it does strike me that he is doing more outreach than the average person, right? He's reported to live among them, and he did get an Indigenous name, so there has to be some acceptance. And he's on record for thinking, as many people did of the day, thinking the Mississauga involved in the largest screw job almost imaginable. You can't even retreat to this. My understanding is you can't even retreat to this bizarre treaty system and say, oh, well, they had treaties. They didn't. They just somebody just decided you're moving, and you correct the history if I'm misleading people. Collapsed them up to the credit, took them in because they had nowhere to go, and straight appropriation.
Yep.
Seems to be what followed in that case, right?
Well, there in the last land claim that I believe that the Mississaugas have in a small spot in Oakville. What had happened is that prior to them leaving to where they are now out in Hagersville, on their small last piece of land along the shoreline of Lake Ontario there, they said that they were leaving to this new land that they were buying. But what they were doing is that they were giving this last remaining piece of land to the crown in trust. So they didn't sell it. They didn't give it away. They said that we're asking you to hold this land in trust because they just realized they couldn't survive there anymore, but they didn't want to give up that last piece of land because the Mississaugas have always traditionally had a connection to the water. So they knew that this was their last connection to the water and they didn't want to give it up. So they gave it to the Crown to be held in trust, who wound up selling it.
There's a definitely whole series of bad dealings, right? The trouble is we can't fix any of that stuff that happened in the past, right? We can't dismiss it. I'm not saying, oh, it happened in the past, too bad, and dismiss it. You know, because there's obviously huge feed-forward effects of this. I don't want to
Yeah.
seem like I'm minimizing um, how problematic it is having one of these. I don't want to say historical injustices because I think historical justice is kind of minimizing it, almost cultural injustices. Is that
Yeah.
fair?
I like that, Greg. I'd agree with you.
Difficult to disentangle yourself from. It's like telling someone to get over the death of a child, right?
Just get over it.
Just get over it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, which, by the way, I mean, I did watch this terrible documentary of this couple, and they had a small child die tragically, and they kept interviewing between the female character and the male character, and the female character was like, I gave myself permission to go crazy for a year
Mm.
basically and just check out, not go to work and eat whenever I want and sleep in because I was so devastated by this event. I can't even imagine the nightmare of it, right? And then they went to the male character and he's like, yeah, after 2 weeks, people call you and they say your kids have missed 2 weeks of school. They don't miss 3. Like it's like can't even imagine this, right? But all these people are immediately like, your kids have to have Christmas again. There has to be laughter in the home. Like it's 3 weeks, and external people are. Anyway, I'm throwing it out there, but that's like an incredible. That's just an incredible example of the horror of
Yeah.
tragedy. You know what I mean? You feel like going crazy for a year, and 2 weeks later, people are
Get
saying,
over it. Yeah. Move on.
why can't you walk
Yeah.
it
Time to
off?
get back to
You know,
things. Yeah. When
yeah, time to get back to
when
things.
we were talking about the Mississaugas in the land claim there, those things can be remedied in today's day and age. I mean, the Mississaugas did it with the city of Toronto a number of years back when they had a land claim there. Took many years, but it was finally resolved through the courts. I'm hoping that we can do a little less mitigation with any other future land claims. Maybe try to have some healing circles as part of it, but whether that is a settlement and maybe finding some land along the Bronte Creek area or the 16 Mile Creek area, whether it's municipal land, provincial land, or federal crown land that can be given back to the Mississaugas as a reminder of where they once lived. Right. So there are ways to definitely remedy it. I always like to say, where there's a will, there's a way.
Well, the trouble is that you're interfacing. Like this is going to be the huge backside of COVID problem. Everyone's going to run out of money, right? This is a money problem, right? This is like whatever you're doing, you're going to have to pay for. That money has to come through taxes, right? And no politicians want to walk out there and say they're raising taxes, right? So post COVID is going to just be. I'm no financial expert. It's going to be a bloodbath if you just look at the finances of it. 10% of every federal tax dollar is going to go to interest
Yeah.
once this COVID thing is over. 10% of every federal tax dollar is going to go to debt service interest, and that's going to create a 4 or 5% fight everywhere, and everyone is going to get crass over money everywhere. And this is where the injustices are swept under the rug or easily propagated.
Yeah.
When nobody wants to hear about them because there's immediate sacrifice to be made to right this this problem, this historical. Well, it's not historical in a way because the descendants of the people are still alive. When I say historical, it sounds like a cannon battle in the 1600s, Britain. It's not quite like that, right?
It's a battle. It's a battle we're still fighting today. Fighting today, Greg.
Right. But I mean, does if again, if I could freeze that border, let's say we could just come to, I don't want to say final status, but final status agreement on the border, right? Boom, the border is now set, right? Like I do think someone's not you or I have to do it, but somebody has to come up with at least a vague checklist of what would heal 80% of the grievance. There's no healing 100% of the grievance on any
Mhm.
side ever. In my experience, divorce, whatever it is, there's no 100%. But if you could get to 80% of the grievance um, um, solved, what does that look like? Right. That's I think nobody knows. Nobody has that.
Yeah, no.
Instead, you're just getting one by one creepy legal battles, which is helping no one really.
Well, as Senator Murray Sinclair had said, is it's taken us 150 years to get into this mess. Don't be surprised if it's going to take 150 for us to get out of it. I don't think that we're going to find the answers in my lifetime or your lifetime, Greg. But I know that we're going to be a lot closer to it than we were 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. I look forward to, what Canada will look like for my granddaughter Sequoia, when she gets older, and so that she doesn't have to experience racism or people denying history, or people not wanting to hear anything other than a Eurocentric perspective on Canada's history. That's what I hope for.
Yeah, listen, I hope for that too, but we have to give some place for we have to give the bulk. It's like even by 2035, it's still, even though you've got immigration theoretically raging, it's a huge thing. It's the people currently in Canada now still make a massive, like people born in Canada still will manage to outnumber people not born in the geographical borders of Canada, even like for the foreseeable future, right? So I'm not saying that you has to come up with the narrative or even it's your responsibility too, but someone has to come up with some kind of narrative of something to hook themselves to say, you have this proud heritage, you know what I mean? That you're excited about and the culture aspects of it, right? Well, you have to give the whatever the groups of people that all get along. I don't know what those traditions are. I'm not going to
Mhm.
say, what they are, but we definitely need to figure out some way to glue people together. Like I noticed from the kids is that they'll do sort of like a Mexican Day of the Dead, right? And that will be like revered as this great thing, and then they'll do like this other thing, and that will be this like revered great thing, and they'll do this, and this will be this revered great thing, and then they get to Halloween, and it's like crapped on over like. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. What is the thing that they all have together? You have to give me something that because everybody's going to be
Mhm.
together. That's the thing. There's no one's retreating to separate encampments. Like everyone's going to be mixing in the public space. So I'm always like, what thing can we give them that's that's theirs together? That they can all say is our thing. We all do this together. We all remember doing Halloween. We all did Christmas because I don't really consider it a Christian. Lots of people who are not Christian celebrate Christmas. Something like that. It doesn't have to be Christmas. If you want to, if you want to make up a festival, you know what I mean, or thing, and say we're going to all do this, and everyone can take part in it. You know what I mean? On this day, release this thing, and some sort of cultural celebration day. That's somehow I think how you got to get to.
Yeah,
I don't know how to get to it,
yeah.
but and it's with this orange shirt thing. Don't do. I mean, I'm saying don't do like that, but like if you brought me in as a consultant and said we're going to do orange shirt day, right? It's like, okay, what can we do on orange shirt day that has an acknowledgement that immediately has something almost fun in a way that's respectful? I don't know how to do that. That's a tough sell, but something so like the kid, that just immigrated from, Pakistan, and the kid that's, just immigrated from wherever, and the kid that grew up Canadian, right? All can take part in this celebration, or it's not total celebration. I get that. You know what I mean? Take part in something together. That I think is the thing that someone's got to figure out.
You know, when we go to school, uh, they start the day with the national anthem. And it's that moment where all of us, whether we're Canadians and some of us soon to be Canadians, take that minute or two to stop and acknowledge that relationship as Canadians and acknowledge that relationship that we have with this country and with each other, right? I, I think that I think that that has lost its value. Unfortunately, I don't know whether it's from the parents or whatnot. I go into schools, and sometimes children don't stand up; they're still talking. They keep their hats on. Sometimes I'm watching them, and they can't even sing the whole song anymore. And I'm like, come on, what's up with that? And I'm not even Canadian, right? When I look at Canada, I like to think that Canada is not necessarily great, but is a country of great potential. Great potential. We're just not there yet. Got a ways to go, but we're working on it. But one of the other things is that, how we bring everyone together is through something called the land acknowledgement. And I know that in the Halton and in the Halton Catholic school boards, as with many school boards across Ontario now, what they're trying to do is to incorporate the land acknowledgement at the beginning of the day with the national anthem. And when I teach about the land acknowledgement, I tell all these students, I said, this land acknowledgement, as much as we're sharing it in the context of an Indigenous practice, I said, but all of your ancestors did everything in the land acknowledgement, right? So, Greg, a long, 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 long time ago, before organized religion, your ancestors, many, many moons ago, they're more than likely spiritual people. They acknowledged things around them. They probably looked at this planet that you call Earth maybe a little bit differently. When we look at the trees and the plants, the original nations, your ancestors had a relationship with them. It provided them with food, resources, fire to keep warm, that provided your ancestors with medicines to keep them alive, right? They had a relationship with the trees and plants. When we look at the stewards of this land, the four-legged, the finned, and the flyers, your ancestors a long time ago probably had a much different relationship with those things beyond them just being food. When you look at Nabish, water, well, everyone all around the world realizes that water is life, water is sacred. We can acknowledge the grandfathers, or as you call them, rocks. And again, we look at some places around the world, and you look at Stonehenge, bunch of rocks. Those people had a connection to them. When we look at the father son, Grandma Moon, and her distant relations, the star people, and these are all things that, and it doesn't matter where you come from on Mother Earth, these are all things that our ancestors at one time had a relationship with. Your ancestors and my ancestors, Greg, at different parts of the world, it was at nighttime, it was cold, we got a little fire going, we canter around, all right, it's a good day, no one got eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. And what your ancestors and my ancestors did at different parts of the world, they would look up into the night sky and they saw these things up there. And they wondered, what are they? Where do they come from? What do they mean? And your ancestors and my ancestors, they would see images and shapes that we now call constellations. And your ancestors and mine, we would create stories out of those images that we saw. And what I find interesting is that sometimes those stories were very closely related as well. So I use the land acknowledgement as a tool for us to celebrate our humanity, not just as Canadians, not just as Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Because when we look at the land acknowledgement, these are all things that we all did long, 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 long time ago.
My trouble with the land acknowledgement is not as a concept, is that it's like after the national anthem, and you yourself spoke about how much reverence is going in to the to the national anthem, right? Um, I I think to myself, if someone could change that land acknowledgement to a more into a more accessible teaching, um, I think that that might get more might get more pay dirt, because we could get a like what you just said was perfect, right? But that is not the land acknowledgement, read out in this painful way at the start of a municipal council meeting.
Yeah.
I fear that they designed something which was good that is now becoming rote.
Well, what we're doing is It's not just writing out the land acknowledgement and putting it up on a PowerPoint and reading it. So, at least with the Halton District School Board, I know that when we go in and when we talk about the land acknowledgement, we give them that whole deeper understanding of what it is. And that takes a whole class. When I have many, many different places coming in to ask me about, can you help us with a land acknowledgement? And my first question is always, well, what kind of relationship do you have already? Are you just looking for a land acknowledgement so you can check off a box? Or do you really want to know what it means? And so, if people want to actually take the time and understand that the land acknowledgement is more than just a political statement of whose treaty territory that you're on, but it is the treaty that we have with all of our relationships and breaking that down in the minimum of an hour so that they understand it. And that's the right direction to go into. I've had people say that, can you write me up a land acknowledgement? No, I can't. Because you have to understand where it comes from, not just here, but here as well.
Yeah, I would prefer, like, listen, again, I'm not telling you what to do. I would say from a consulting perspective, if you just said, I would prefer if you change the land acknowledgement to a traditional teaching moment, right? Like we used to have the Lord's Prayer right on the
Yep.
back of the national anthem. We said the Lord's Prayer every time. The Lord's Prayer minus the minus the religious context, right? If you actually look at the structure of it, it's great. It's a great thing to say at the start of the day, right? Uh, Something like that, I think, would be
Yeah.
fantastic. If somebody codified this, because that's bringing people in, right? That's like what you said earlier. You have permission to say this thing and bringing people in, right? Whereas I don't know what the acknowledgement speaks to the fact of some sort of historical injustice in which your house is not on property that was like legally deeded through some crazy construction to you, right? But that doesn't do anything for a 6-year-old. They can't do anything about that, right? So I don't know how it's interpreted. I don't know how that is interpreted as something positively, positive by them as they're sitting in their class having this thing listen to the PA system. If it for the elementary kids or whatever, if that was changed to a teaching moment, we got to wrap up in a second, but um, I would, as a consultant, I would suggest that that could be something everybody could sort of bind to of all sort of backgrounds,
Yeah.
right?
No.
So that would be my 2 cents. But so what's next, Steve?
Ah, thank you for asking, my friend. It's just one more step. It's the journey that we're on towards truth and reconciliation. I don't think that there is a roadmap that exists. We're foraging it ourselves right now. But what is next, my friend, is what we're doing right now. Just having conversations, having dialogue, and some little opposing different points of view, but still being able to get together and talk. It's when those conversations stop. That's what I'm worried about. Whether it's a church group, whether it's a workplace, whether it's government, whatever, whether it's a podcast, we need to keep having these conversations going forward. And I just want to say, Chimigwich, thank you so much for the opportunity. For me, it certainly has been one sunny day. And I'm enjoying the light that you brought out here. Thank you for the opportunity. And one other thing I just wanted to share with you. I think I'd mentioned to you that I've just moved to Burlington from Oakville. I just found out the name was Aldershot Village the other day. And I like those low buildings. I like those low buildings that are lower than like 6 stories. Kind of looks nice around here.
It does. I I can't say I've thought of that before, um, yeah, it just occurs to me that we probably live like 25 feet from my house, and yet we did this over the internet. Thanks very much, Steve.
Excellent. All right, my friend. In Ojibwe, we don't have a word for goodbye. Because the hope and intention is that we will always see each other again, as many cultures share around the world. So the words that we say when we part company are ba ma pi. So, my friend Greg, I just want to say Chimigwich, thank you for the opportunity, and ba ma pi, my friend.
Bon appetit to yourself.